Yo everybody, what's going on? This is Keegan from Kman Reviews bringing you the next episode of Review Recall. This episode will cover about as many albums as I could listen to in November plus any months dragged on from the end of the year. I know I'm a bit late with these episodes and I'm going to try to get myself back into the rhythm of it, but we have a lot of music to talk about in this episode, so let's dive in. Oh hey, it's another mediocre Smashing Pumpkins album. Who could have ever guessed? This one actually hurts me as a fan since the vocals are great, the lyrics are emotional and honest and from the gut, but man, these instrumentals are so boring and turn this album into a fight to stay awake to. Probably one of the biggest disappointments that released last year. So Skelbeats is an Australian hip-hop producer, and I believe this is his first masterminded project with quite the list of features over these grimy, angry, menacing beats, and as you'd expect from the underground scene, it's pretty great. Wow, this is a fun album. Nothing revolutionary for the band at all, and will likely be seen as a shallow or overproduced or what have you album, but I had a blast with it. Better than his last album earlier in the year, though that's mostly due to it not being as long. His charisma is still quite nice, but it's just simply not a favorite of mine. Very solid listen here. I do think the vocals can get a bit annoying, however I really enjoyed the glamorous yet grungy garage styling on display here. Very solid. This record served as pretty solid background noise for nearly 2 hours, but pretty much nothing here stood alone. I think Dean Lewis gets a bit too much hate. Sure, I 100% get the comparisons to similar crooners like James Bay and Lewis Capaldi, but I think Dean separates himself from them in two different ways. One, the writing he has is better, not perfect, but better, and two, and this is especially true for Lewis Capaldi, he doesn't have an annoying voice, and I think those two things when paired with emotionally potent instrumentals make for some of the best music in this singer-songwriter crooner scene. You know, if the music is going to be this consistent, then please, more, that would be appreciated. This is one of the cleanest, sugariest, most cavity-inducing albums I've heard in a long time. Basically AJR or Imagine Dragons level material. Decent enough for me, I guess, but I don't see this being received too well at all. Yeah, it's certainly not as fun or compact as Bobby's EP earlier this year, but man, this guy just has some really infectious deliveries, way more so than the average trap rapper, and I think that's what really saved this tape for me. This album was a 12-year-long wait only for the band to get even more sterile. It kinda reminds me of the Down with Webster comeback 2 years ago, which was way worse than this, but the intrinsic catchiness the band scored with on tracks like Turn It Up or Summer Girl is nowhere to be seen. Just more so a simple pop rock album with huge emphasis on pop. So Brockhampton closed out their career with 2 albums released just within a day of each other, so let's talk about the first one being The Family, which I honestly think is pretty great. I like the eulogizing and vulnerability put on display here, and I do think people are just shitting on it because it's being marketed as a Brockhampton album when really it's just Kevin's. If it was actually under Kevin's own name, it would be received way better. Now let's talk about TM, the actual final Brockhampton release with all of the members, and while I do think it's good, it's probably the weakest core Brockhampton album. You can kind of get that vibe that the members weren't there fully and it feels a little bit lacking, but there are some bangers to be had here for sure. Absolutely loved seeing this band grow from the very start. Hard to admit this era is over, but I'm glad this band had a huge effect on me and my love for hip-hop. The best boy band since One Direction. Solid country EP here, not too memorable, but made for a decent listen while it was on. Wow, talk about a sonic 180. Very emotionally charged, very consistent in that nature too. Such a creative outpour from someone who around 5 years ago was still doing that YouTube rap scene. I'm all for a good transformation, and this is certainly one of the best last year. Excellent stuff. I kinda wish I fully understood why everyone is loving this so much. To me, this just feels like one-note Baroque pop with pretty solid vocals. Still a decent enough listen, I guess, but I don't know, I guess it wasn't for me. Storytelling, top-notch. Atmosphere, top-notch. Energy, top-notch. What else is there to say? So I listened to the full deluxe version of this record, which is nearly 2 hours long, and I'll admit I started to drift off around halfway through the second disc. However, I do enjoy the pop-tinted metal on display here. I didn't really come out of this with any strong highlights, but it was a pleasant enough listen. Latest mixtape from Lecrae, who I still think gets a bit too much flack for being labeled under this Christian rap scene or whatever, and I think there's a good amount of bangers on this tape here that only help my enjoyment of his music. A very sweet and comforting listen here. I get why it's getting all the love, and I think it absolutely deserves it. Probably won't be an all-time favorite of mine this year, but still amazing, and highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. So the first side of White Melodies, released earlier in 2022, was already fantastic, and will likely see a fairly high spot on my upcoming year-end list video. Naturally, I had to check out the B-side record here, which is a whole other 16 tracks to go along with the already established 20 from side A, and it's just more amazing material. Not as bright as side A in my opinion, but this still establishes Black Chidori as one of the most consistent rappers in the underground scene today. Go check it out. It's a decent lo-fi cloud rap album, a miraculous 35 tracks that doesn't get too boring at all, but hardly has any standouts due to the sheer amount of tracks on here. Still, decent listen. Yeah, this was pretty solid. Though the fact that the company owner disbanded the group because it didn't sell 100K is absolutely batshit insane, but that's besides the point. The music is still good, just wish this group was given more time to grow and develop. Dang, people are hating on this? What's there to hate? Fun, bouncy pop rap, catchy vocal melodies, stacked list of features who all deliver? Sure, maybe it's a bit long, but with how damn consistent it is, I feel like that's almost a positive. I like this a lot. Amazing stuff on here. And this is another album that was very fun to my surprise. I was going into this expecting a full reggaeton album, and I was going to come out and call it generic, but it incorporates elements of hyperpop, synth wave, and it just might be one of my favorite reggaeton albums I've ever heard. You know, it's fine. It's actually quite good, probably one of the better solo JR releases I've heard. But man, there is something in his music that doesn't fully click with me in the same way his contemporaries do. It may just be something in his tone, which kind of makes sense since he has a line on here where he mentions he'd rather be shooting hoops. But I don't know, maybe I gotta go back to some of the older stuff to properly click with it, but as it stands, he's not quite for me yet. If you've been following Neil Young and Crazy Horse's latest run of albums, this is just more of it. Even though it was produced by Rick Rubin, there's not really a difference in its sound compared to Barn per se. It's another solid Neil Young record, although the 15-minute closer Chevrolet is quite the jamming journey of a song. If you do check out one track from this album, make it that one. Yet another killer job by Stu Bangus working with Vic to deliver these incredible, heavily jazz-inspired drumless beats, as Vic's flow is still as gripping as it's ever been. Yet another great album for underground hip-hop. Typical ballads from the EXO main vocalist here, and while they are lovely, the real star of the show is the song Traveler, which is like this groovy, snappy R&B tune, such a banger, and this whole EP was a great listen. If you want some luscious ballads from a phenomenal vocalist, give this a listen. Snoop Dogg's 2022 has been wildly hit or miss. Both volumes of his NFT drop series have been pretty bad, but the actual releases this year, BODR and Endless Summer, have saved his reputation, and I think this one with DJ Dramas is snug in the middle. Not a great record, but really doesn't have any bad songs on it, just a fun vibe of a hip-hop record that shows maybe Snoop does still have it. I am stricken by personal biases on this one, because I absolutely adore this sound, and I think it works pretty much flawlessly throughout the record. Some ones here don't quite click in that same way, like Roll the Old Chariot gets a bit tedious, but all in all, this may just be one of my favorite albums this year. It's certainly what you'd expect from your typical Droog project, however, he really seemed invested in his pen game on this one, as the bars really stood out. Aside from that though, good production, good flow, good project. Now, I've been a firm Nickelback enjoyer for as long as I can remember, so naturally I was very excited to hear word of this album releasing since Feed the Machine came out 6 years ago, and also since San Quentin was quite a good single in my opinion. And I'm happy to report that the rest of the album lives up to that hype. Good mix of heavier, more groove metal inspired, but also some typical Nickelback cheese in the pop rock ballads too. Hell, Does Heaven Even Know You're Missing sounds like a lost cut from around 2005 to 2008. All in all, I like it, and I think newer listens could have a lot to like about this too. Probably one of the better projects for both DJ Drama and Youngboy this year. Drama feels much more appropriate here with a bit more energy, and that energy makes for one of Youngboy's more engaging projects as well. But I don't know, I just think Youngboy needs to relax a little bit. I would probably say it's on the better end for Stryper. Tight instrumentation, solid vocals, pretty consistent energy throughout. I get the band has a bit of a reputation for being overly Christian metal, but frankly that didn't really come through too much on this one. It just seemed like a very solid glam metal album. While this one is not as mind-bending, adventurous, or lyrically dense as Ethiop's, Billy's still definitely riding that magic on this album, and this is a very good listen. Who actually gives a shit? Damn, this record drags, man. It is so slow, grueling, and just not that fun for a supposedly dance hall album. You know, Perfect Plan have just been one of those lightning in a bottle bands for me. Amazing melodies, satisfyingly nostalgic style, and Kent Healy, who I still believe is one of the best vocalists currently active today in any genre. And this new album of theirs, while not living up to the amazing level that their last was, Time for a Miracle, still does a fantastic job, and yeah, I'm so happy I got to fall in love with this band. And Rod Wave decides to fall off pretty hard from his last album earlier this year, with what may just be his most generic project yet, just copy and paste 8 different tracks. Thankfully, an improvement from the sleep-inducing mess that was Golden Hour, way more organic, unique, and fun as well. Can't say I absolutely loved it, but I'm just happy Kygo didn't continue on that horrendous journey. First of all, and I'm very happy to report, huge improvement from their last album, Translation. That album saw the top spot on my worst albums for 2020, and this album may not even see that list at all. Despite that, it's still not that good. A lot of the lines are stupid, the features don't contribute much that hasn't already been done. The biggest raise is in the production and beats, which I think are way more lively and energetic than a lot of reggaeton. Still not a glowing review by any means, but you gotta take the positives when they come at you. I am extremely surprised with how uninteresting this record is. I was optimistic going in, but man, this was just boring, with pretty bad bars to boot. As much as I want to say 21 really helps the project, he kinda doesn't. He has some forgettable verses and kinda just blends in. Even though I wasn't crazy about Honestly Nevermind, I'd rather take that over this. Numbs' 2022 has been pretty stacked. Collaborative albums with both Patty Honcho and Furious Styles, and now a compilation of sorts featuring a lot of his contemporaries, and shocker, when good artists come together, they make good music. A lot of great verses, charisma, and chemistry. Have not been disappointed by a Numbs record yet, and this one does not break that streak. Yeah, this is just a fun, bouncy K-pop listen, what you'd expect from the genre. Not gonna blow your mind or even convince you if you're on the other side of that fence, but it is still fun. Ooh, now this was interesting. Definitely stays more into the core fundamentals of hip-hop than Volume 3 did, but this almost feels like horrorcore in a way. There are some very blunt and questionable lyrics on here, like he's playing up a character. While I do personally think this is the weakest in his mixtape series, all in all it was a resounding success, and I look forward for what the new year has in store for Cystic. Almost feels like a more easygoing, less dominant version of like Cardi B or Megan, and I kinda enjoy it more. Yeah, this one was just another home run for Joji. Loved his vocals, loved the melancholy on display, and while some of the lyrics were a bit melodramatic and cheesy, it worked. I had a blast listening to this record. Really catchy, really fun. I've been sleeping a lot on Tyboy compared to the rest of Drain Gang, but damn, this record makes me feel like I need to change that ASAP. Great album. Not what I was expecting going into a Stormzy record, this time incorporating some soul and R&B, and I think he handles the change well. He's got a very nice voice to handle these more piano-driven cuts, and even though it can be a bit tedious, I still think this is worth a listen. I say this as a pretty heavy fan of Logic. I don't care. I don't know how in the hell you managed to make an album worse than Russell Dickerson, but here it is, folks, in the flesh. Yeah, it's fine. I never really got into Mike, and it's a shame it had to be from this bite-sized piece here, but I look forward to checking out his full length next month. As it stands, this is just alright. Pretty solid metal record. Love the vocalist especially. He's got a bit more texture to his voice than some of the more sterile singers in the genre, and I think it makes for an all-around good time. Out of all the Soulja Boy albums I've listened to this year, this managed to be his worst, somehow, especially since I thought some of them were the worst projects this year. The man just one-ups himself somehow. Certainly has a bit more experimentation than pretty much all of the other Cavetown releases I've listened to, but I noticed this one doesn't really have any unbridled highlights as albums like Sleepyhead did. Still is a great listen though. I have not been the biggest fan of Busta's more recent material to say the least, just haven't found it all that captivating and enjoyable like I know his music can be. This EP is another example of that. So Extraordinary Heroes are a K-pop group that is way more like a typical band. They incorporate a lot of rock elements into their music, and while I wasn't too fond of their breakthrough single Happy Death Day, this EP here was pretty solid. Feels like they're starting to find their groove a bit with punchy rock-tinged beats. I especially enjoyed Haircut's sort of snarky charisma. All in all, a fun EP, though certainly a bit on the unorthodox end for the genre. Boldy just manages to keep his streak going and not missing once this year with another great album. Although I do think this is one of the more lackluster ones, not the most memorable overall, but still has some nice moments. Way better than Louis' debut record. It feels more consistent and passionate with an infectious Britpop punch to it that is not boring at all. Yeah, fun listen. I enjoyed it a lot. This one just kind of felt disappointing. Didn't really feel like she put her all into it and felt half-hearted. Still had a couple of bangers, but really that's about it. It's a bit of a shame how this one didn't stack up to the same level that 22 Break did, but for a synth-pop album, it's pretty solid. As much as I really enjoyed King James's features on other underground rappers' projects, I gotta admit this was a slight disappointment. Didn't quite have as much fire as I was expecting. That being said though, the bars are good, the presence is still solid, and the beats do connect well with the scene here, but no doubt in my mind there were better this year, even among his contemporaries. This was very nice, bunch of bite-sized, jovial, jazzy pop tunes that managed to stay engaging the entire way through. While its 18-song tracklist doesn't leave much for individual standouts, this was still a fun listen, and I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't. Yet another fun collection of tracks from Baby No Money. I do think it's a bit of a come down from each of Veggie's last year, but not by too much. It's still a very good listen. Probably one of the better Disturbed albums as of late, I guess, but still, this band just does not have that same instant appeal they did back in the 2000s. I adore this grittier, more fiery hip-hop scene, especially Novator's last album he did with Stu Bangus, and while this one isn't as good as that, still a great listen. So Young Minnie is a South Korean producer who's been working a lot with Rouger a good bit this year, producing some of his singles. This is her debut project where she pretty much handles production while Rouger is the vocalist for the record, and honestly it's quite a nice vibe. A very heavy pop production here, a lot of bass, kinda grimy and industrial, but still has some clearer moments like the single Puppets. Yeah, great debut into the world, looking forward to what's next. It is so cool witnessing Nas going through this late career renaissance. He's been on a streak since the first King's Disease album, and while this one isn't my favorite of the bunch, God, this is still fantastic. Yeah, I gotta say, this is probably one of the weaker Roddy projects. He just seems to be regressing and fading into an ordinary rapper who lost his unique sound. It's still decent, I suppose, but mostly is disappointing. Alrighty folks, and that'll do it for this episode of Review Recall. Thank you all so much for watching. If you did, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to follow me on all my social medias and join the Discord server. Links to all of them will be in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.